Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, basically my basement, with a shelf full of bins that have worms in them. And I've got a bin that I want to feed today. It's the one that's smack in the middle over there. It's a bin that's got a mixed variety of different worms in it. And the label attempts to explain that, but it uses abbreviations. The RW is short for red wigglers, the ENC is short for European night crawlers, and the blues are the Indian blues. This is a bin that's been around for 90 days now, and it was 9 days ago that we last fed it. And I thought there was another number 9. There was something that made the number so easy to remember that I didn't have to take notes. Oh yeah, there's been 9 feedings so far. So today is its 10th feeding, but up until now, with 9 feedings over 90 days, the average interval between feedings has been 10 days between feedings. So we're pretty much on the mark with regards to the interval between feedings by feeding today after 9 days. And the food that they got last time was a bunch of watermelon and stuff that I believe is probably gone by now, so I don't expect to see many leftovers. But I'm going to get that thing up on the bench so we can take a look at it. And once we figure out what we need, we'll go up to the fridge, grab some stuff, and give them some food. So let's get to work. I was about to bring the bin out onto the bench, and I saw a worm trying to crawl out of the bin. There he is, up on the wall. But he was all the way up in the edge. I wonder why. Most worms usually realize that it's kind of dry out here and that exploring the outside world is a dry, dangerous place to be if you're a worm. So they usually retreat back into the bin. But as soon as I picked up the container, the little guy crawled right back down into the into the material. So I just wanted to see if I can get a close-up of that guy for you. But yeah, let's get to feeding this thing. Now before coming down here, I did skim through the video from the last time we checked in on this bin to see if there's any notable occurrences during our last check-in. And there was one thing that sort of did get highlighted while we were looking at the bin and talking about it, which was the apparent dryness of the contents. And I did opt last time we were in here to just make note of it and sort of put it on watch but not react to it. So I've got my water bottle. It's full of water ready to go just in case we need to apply some water today. I guess the other option that I talked about last week was to, maybe restore the plastic coverings to the bin if it does seem like doing so might be beneficial, to try to help keep some of the moisture in and help the moisture that is in there redistribute into the drier materials that are in here. So I believe after we've had a chance to look through here, we will attempt to help boost the moisture level of the bin if it needs it. By taking one or the other actions that I just mentioned, so we'll decide later. I usually just opt for trying to preserve the existing moisture and covering with plastic. I usually kind of try to treat the application of water as sort of a last resort for whatever reason. I don't know, it's just preference, I guess. There was a section in the bin last week, and I believe it was this side, where we noticed a lot of worms. There seemed to be an absence of worms down in the feeding area, and then we inspected one edge and then the other edge, and it seemed like this other edge was where the majority of the worms were in. And there was a higher degree of moisture, higher concentration of moisture within the material on this side, which is probably why the worms were huddling there. And that in itself also kind of, to me, seemed like an indicator of possibly the need to add a little bit of moisture. So these pieces of corn cob, I don't even remember how long it's been since I added them, but as per usual, the worms have pretty much burrowed through the center of them, which is the part of the corn cob that they seem to be able to eat the earliest, and then later on they come back and they eat the rest. But I've got a feeling some sort of microbes or bacteria or something needs to work it down for them a little bit first before they can come in and eat it. There does usually seem to be a little bit of a pause in between. That little splash of green made me think I was going to have some leftover watermelon rinds, but I believe that these are just strips of newspaper with some green ink on them. It's a little deceiving. Here we've got a seed of a mango, or at least the outer husk of it. Last time we looked in here, we didn't see much action, but I do see a little worm hanging out on the inside of it, so that's promising. Here's another corn cob bit. I can feel the inside's hollow. There are quite a number of them. I had corn for dinner last night too, but I opted to take those corn cobs and throw them in the outside compost barrel. I've just got so much stuff piling up in the freezer right now that I really didn't need to put away anything that I thought was going to be kind of slow composting type foods. I get to be picky when I've got an overload of materials in my freezer. So I usually try to opt for stuff that's going to be quick and easy for the worms to eat. So down here, we're seeing some of the bedding. I've been doing this lately. I've been taking some of this freshly added leafy matter that I usually sprinkle across the top at the end. And then I try to introduce and give it a little bit more exposure to the worm action by adding it to the feeding area, using it as sort of a bedding boost for the feeding area, and then using some fresh leaves to cover up with at the end. So it does seem like we've got a little bit of extra moisture down here in the feeding area where the watermelon had been added and the other foods had been added. But it is also full of leaves that are still not quite that damp. But it's really not that dangerous. The worms are definitely hanging out there. It's probably because there was food. I don't think they would be drawn to that area otherwise because of the seemingly lack of moisture. Seemingly lack of moisture? The apparent lack of moisture. It's always kind of fun just disturbing some of this material and then watching it all squirm. This is the only bin of mine that I've got blue worms in, and this is the first system that I've ever had blue worms in. Or at least it's the only batch of worms that I've ever had that are blue worms. And they're pretty fast movers. They're kind of a small worm. They remind me a little bit of the red wigglers, but they look a little different. They're skinnier, and obviously their movement is much different from the red wigglers. And it seems to me almost, I don't know, more and more as time goes on, this bin that is supposedly occupied with a mixed batch of different types of worms appears to almost be transforming into almost like a bin full of blue worms only. So I think they are pretty quick when it comes to propagating their numbers. It kind of makes me wonder if they're just kind of outnumbering the other types of worms that occupy this system and taking over in a way. We usually do bump into a somewhat larger worm here and there. And the much larger worms that are in here are the Euros. And then the ones that are kind of in the middle there are the red wigglers, the middle size, that is. Let's get this little guy back in. So I just found myself sort of preoccupied there, digging through the feeding area, because it did seem to me like last time we were in here, the feeding area didn't have a whole lot of action going on. So maybe with the addition of some watermelon, we might have boosted up the moisture level in here as well as the general interest by the worms to be in there. So I was also curious to see how things look on the outer edges of this bin, but I don't have a whole lot of room since I'm kind of approaching the upper limit along the outer edge here. And you know, I'm not at risk of overflowing or anything like that, but when I do want to sort of stack up the materials a little bit and make myself some room in the middle, I do start nearing the edge. Some more corn cob bits. So I do need to run upstairs to get some food for these little guys. And it does seem like there's very little, if any, leftovers here. Obviously there was that mango seed, wherever that thing ended up. And little bits of corn cob, but not a whole lot of anything else. So let's take a pause here now so I can run upstairs, grab some food for them, and then we'll pick up where we left off to get them fed. So, break time, and I'll be right back. So now these are the things that I selected out of the freezer to feed them with today, and certain things like these cucumbers are just loaded with moisture, that's for sure. The melon, these pieces of cantaloupe melon, pieces of lettuce leaves, actually the stem of the head of lettuce. There's all kinds of other little varied things in here, such as cucumber peels and carrot bits. I think that this collection of food items should bring with it a good amount of moisture. The coffee grounds that I took out of the machine last night, they seem pretty damp still too. It was kind of a humid night, so those didn't get a chance to dry too much overnight. So they'll be bringing in a little bit of moisture with them. And I would think that you would probably agree too that as we inspected this feeding area, we did observe that there was a pretty good, moisture level in there. Obviously there were some little bits of stuff in here that was dry, still sort of scattered in amongst the food items, a little bit dry, but not dangerously dry. So I'm thinking of, rather than adding water or covering with plastic, I think that that third option that I may or may not have mentioned, which was to selectively pick food items that have a higher degree of moisture to them, might be enough here. So, I want to make little minor adjustments at a time, tweak the process, and, not allow things to swing too heavily from one end to the other. So I think we'll be good by just using all those cucumbers to continue to boost moisture in here. It does seem like all the watermelon rinds that they got last time seem to add a good bit of moisture, because that would be really the only explanation as to how moisture ended up increasing in the feeding area. So I've got a couple other things in here which are also carbon-based food items to include with the food that they're getting. Just a couple soiled paper towel, well, one soiled paper towel, one soiled napkin. And I guess we could start dropping in the food. We'll just spread it out evenly across the top here so that the moisture coming off this stuff can, help moisten all the surrounding materials. So I'll take these juicy bits of cucumber, I think there were 4 of them, and sort of spread them out evenly across the bottom. The rest of the stuff is kind of small little bits that we can just kind of dump in, I suppose, and then at the end we can add the dessert, the yummy melon rinds, which still have a little bit of melon on them. Yeah, I think that this feeding is going to bring with it a pretty good amount of moisture. Anything that's frozen, once it starts thawing out, it's just going to kick off a whole bunch of moisture. That's going to significantly hydrate this middle area. So I've got some crushed eggshell here. Let's drop it in as the grit to include with today's feeding. I don't even know if I've missed a feeding with this bin. They've probably gotten grit almost every time or close to every time. And in goes the rest of the food. And I guess the topper here is going to be this coffee filter, which is yet more paper, basically, which is just more carbon-based food for them. So it's usually a pretty good combination with the leaves on the bottom, the paper, towels, napkins, all good carbon source food items to balance out the nitrogen-rich food that they're getting. And I'm just breaking this up into little pieces for good measure. And even though we've added a good amount of bedding to this already, although, I don't know, I'm not sure if we can call it bedding if it's in little pieces. It's almost like it's food already when it's small. I don't know. I have this weird urge to classify things all the time, it seems, but I mean, it just seems like the manner in which these carbon food items were added, the paper, basically, and even the leaves on the bottom, don't really serve the purpose of bedding. To me, the bedding is like a pile of stuff somewhere, and it's the pile of stuff that the worms can actually, move into to hang out in if they want. So I think by adding a whole bunch of shredded paper like this, Now we can say that we're actually adding bedding. So the level in here is coming up pretty nicely. And it's basically because I've been piling in so much bedding every time. I've been really generous with the bedding lately in all of my bins. And I think it's benefiting all of my bins quite nicely. It's creating a really nice environment for the worms to live in. Now let's bring over some more of this stuff from the side here to cover up with. I think there was leftovers here, right? There's some leftover bedding scraps, and here's that mango seed. So let's see if we can just kind of jam those down to where the feeding area was. Okay, so I did want to check the outer edges of the bin. Like I mentioned earlier, there was a good amount of dampness on this side if I remember correctly, and it was a little bit drier over here. I'm just curious to see if that's still the case, or are things starting to equalize here a little bit better. There's some worms hanging out there, and there's a larger size worm. Makes me wonder if that's one of the Euros. What else have we down here? Yeah, the stuff is starting to look really nice. 90 days, you know, we're approaching 3 months. I would say it's pretty much par for the course to see a good amount of casting starting to pile up. But I have been using a lot more bedding lately, past couple months. And it'll take them more time to break all that stuff down, all those bedding materials. And at some point I might just start withholding feedings and let them focus more on the leftover scraps of this and that are all over the place within this bin. But for now I'm just treating it like an everyday bin, even when it comes time to cover with leaves on the top. In certain bins, when we start approaching the 100th day mark, I usually start to question whether I want to keep putting stuff like leaves in here. The leaves, you know, obviously leave behind all these little sticks and stems of the leaf stems, and you know, I try not to put in a lot of stuff that's going to take forever to break down towards the end. I mean, some people run their bins for hundreds and hundreds of days. My average is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150. And with the added amount of bedding that I've been putting into my bins lately, it does seem like I'm approaching the capacity of these bins much more rapidly than I have in the past. Or maybe in the past I've just opted to drive towards harvest without actually approaching capacity. But I do feel like I'm actually going to start getting driven to harvest because of capacity constraints, because of all the bedding I've been using recently. And I believe that over time they'll probably need a little extra time to work all that extra stuff down. So yeah, things look pretty good over here. Oddly enough, there's not that much moisture or worms here, so maybe I just got the two sides of the bin mixed up. Or maybe I just haven't really scraped the right section yet. I don't know, what do you think? I think that the other side had more worms in it. Or maybe a pretty equal amount. I'm trying to remember. This is kind of reminiscent of a piece of something that I encountered in the past that made me question whether or not it was an organic piece of material or some sort of synthetic material that might never really break down. I think I had already in the past questioned whether I want to remove this or not, but I gave it the benefit of the doubt and threw it back in. But I don't want to artificially break it down, or I don't want to break it into little pieces. Then I have to fish two pieces out if it's something that doesn't really belong in a worm bin. So I'll just continue with giving it the benefit of the doubt, but if we don't see any progress on that thing, it might need to come out because it might not even be a natural item. It might be some sort of dryer sheet or something. I don't know what it is. I mean, its texture and its appearance does make me wonder if it might be a dryer sheet. So let's get things leveled off here a little bit. I do like the way things look in here, for sure, definitely. Very nice bin. Worms are doing a great job in here. I'm just trying to cover up all these little scraps of paper everywhere. I did put quite a bit in at the end there, and it's pretty close to the surface. But, you know, since we are going to sprinkle some more leaves on the top, they'll be covered up in no time, so let's not worry too much about it. Let's go ahead and give them a top covering of leaves. But, you know, at 90 days, this could be the last time I add leaves to the top, in the interest of not having all kinds of little sticks and stems that are going to take forever to break down. But for now, I think we're still in good shape. I think that this bin can handle it. But capacity could end up being the reason we decide to, you know, end the composting phase of this bin and transition it to its next phase of its life cycle, which in my bins would normally just sort of be a foraging stage where the worms are left to feed on all the leftovers and remains that linger within the bin versus giving them fresh stuff. So I think we'll decide that next time we come in here what we want to do. I do have other bins that are already in excess of 100 days old, still getting fed. I think in those cases it might just be because there's still room to go, but in this case I do feel like I'm starting to approach the limit. So what do you think? I like the way this bin's looking. Nice productive bin. These blue worms are really kind of fun. Definitely a different experience for me having these little guys. I guess I just like their active behavior. It's kind of interesting to open up the bin and find these little guys buzzing around, but I also feel like I'm seeing much fewer Euros. It almost seems like their numbers keep dropping, and usually I encounter a nice big Euro in here while I'm working, and maybe I missed one. Maybe I did see a couple when I was working and I just was paying attention to something else, but I don't know. To me, it seems like maybe their numbers are dwindling in here. I could be wrong though. So, all right, everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.